Let's go to our friend Bimnet Abibi from Galaxy Trading. As always, Bimnet, welcome to Galaxy Brains.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a really exciting time. Is it so far? Is this too far to go to say that there's like a run on U.S. government debt happening?
I would say the moves that we've had over the past several weeks are indicative of a market that's not functioning properly, right? It's indicative of a market that's woken up to the reality of fiscal policy, what it means currently and what it means going forward. And the magnitude of like that realization versus where we were before is pretty huge, and that's why you're having this catch up.
Yeah.
The essence of it is there's more treasury supply coming, and it's just not stopping. And so when there's just infinite supply, right, prices go down.
Yeah.
And prices of bonds went down this week, particularly in the back end. I don't think they're done. And the only likely solution is these prices cheapen to the point where the government starts feeling uncomfortable and the Fed starts feeling really
Something
uncomfortable.
breaks, basically.
Something
right?
breaks, or something becomes untenable.
This is just the U.S. government issues this debt in order to finance itself, right?
Correct.
To provide itself with money to spend. And theoretically, you could take in revenues that would be equal to the spending, and so that would be a nice.
Oh, that's not happening in our
that
current
hasn't
political
happened
climate.
in decades.
Absolutely not.
So they're printing all of this debt, and people are becoming more and more concerned that we'll ever be able to pay it off, right? Or that we'll pay this off, but it'll get more and more expensive. Our credit is declining, basically, right?
No, absolutely. So the issue right now that we're having is, it was okay to issue all that debt at 2% interest rates or at 0, right? And the interest expense wouldn't like kill you as much. But now it's like the fiscal policy is such that it looks like you're going to be printing like 5% deficits at least going forward, and your interest expense is constantly going up as a portion of your budget, and so the math becomes untenable.
Spirals, basically.
It spirals, but then in the context of like all the unfunded liabilities that you have in the balance sheet, you can see that the debt's only going to continue to increase. And it's never an issue because it hasn't been an issue because there's always been buyers of this paper.
Yeah.
Right? Mainly the central banks. They own like a quarter of it.
Yeah.
But foreign officials, corporates,
Sovereigns,
pensions, insurance, etc. But at this point, with such huge mark-to-market losses, more supply coming, and the central banks can't really buy that back, or the U.S. central bank can't buy it because it'd send the wrong signal because you're still, 1.6% above your inflation target. And so they can't really start buying that paper. And if they signal that they're buying that paper, it basically means we're going to have money printing forever.
Right.
Which
they're trying
is the reality.
We know we will, but right now they're gritting their teeth trying to like be as stern as possible to say it won't happen.
Correct. But my issue is that all of this stuff is really bad, right? If you were in an EM economy and you're like, holy shit, my country has to print debt forever, and the only way they can pay it is by inflating it and having the central bank buy it, you'd be like, I want to sell that currency like crazy.
Yeah.
Because it's worthless, because they just keep printing money that they don't have out thin air.
Right.
However, in this instance, you have a situation where the U.S. is winner by default. Everywhere else is way worse.
Right.
Japan's still stuck at negative rates. Their debt to GDP is way, way higher. Right. Europe can't really grow its way out of its issues. They're having a slowdown. They're getting very impacted by the Chinese slowdown as well. And so you've got a situation where the U.S. is the best house on a shitty block, right? And it wins by default. I would like to think that the market is getting smarter on this, and eventually this will lead to folks thinking about Bitcoin more constructively.
Right.
And, I'd like to take this moment to raise the bit signal because it just feels like the right time. I think people are waking up to the reality of the future of this debt path, right?
Right.
We have
Death spiral.
Death spiral,
path, yeah.
correct. I mean, Ray Dalio was on TV yesterday, warning against a literal debt crisis in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so we're fundamentally at a situation where it looks like we're going to spend way more than we ever receive in income in perpetuity.
Right.
And so
that's that currency you'd want to sell.
That's that currency.
But it's the only one left.
What do you sell versus it?
Right.
There
hasn't been an alternative.
And I think that's where it is now, and like that's Bitcoin, right? Finite money, right? Define monetary policy.
By the way, you can use it, right?
You
Gold
can
would be
use it.
great, but I mean, you need
No,
to
but
spend it. I mean, you can't
yeah,
spend it. It's
exactly.
impossible.
Exactly. And then you throw in the positive headwinds of an ETF potentially sooner rather than later. But besides that, like just from a philosophical perspective, the issue is it's not only just the debt construct, but it's a construct of like the U.S. financial plumbing. It is entirely dependent upon the ability to print infinite amount of money and to loan institutions money at ridiculous like contracts and specifications, right? The BTFP, where you can borrow money at par versus, securities and loans, right? That's absurd.
Right.
And the banking system would have literally crumbled without these emergency facilities. The discount window, which had over 100 billion in usage, the BTFP another 100 billion plus, without that, what would regional banking look like right now, right? Without the FX swap lines that the government had, during COVID and all the other random facilities where they just injected free money at zero. You can borrow infinite money versus assets at zero. Without that, the financial plumbing really doesn't work. And some people would argue that, well, it's no better anywhere else. That's how financial plumbing should work, etc. And things are fine because we have this infinite money printing. But in my head, it's guys, this can't last forever. Right. Just infinite balance sheet expansion will have consequences. We're seeing a little bit of it now with this inflation stuff.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, and philosophically, I just have such a huge I don't know, discontent.
Well, and they say, what's the alternative, right?
Yeah.
As you've said, and right now, there's not really one. But the thing is whether or not it's Bitcoin or not, every empire has thought it would last forever or tried to make it last forever, right? But yet every single empire in human history has collapsed, right? And so it's inevitable. I mean, it is inevitable. Now, whether we can hang on to this parlor game for 300 more years, who knows? But it will come to an end. And the fear that I'm seeing now in the markets in general is it does feel new, even though people have been talking about the debt problem for so long and the fiscal and the lack of a balanced budget, et cetera. But now I think people are really starting to freak out, honestly, because the cost, like you said, the cost of merely servicing the debt is going to, it already is 10% of
more.
15%. Eventually, we're not going to. I mean, look
be spending over a quarter of the budget on just the interest expenses.
Right, and so you have to keep raising taxes to cover it, but it's like you're spending more and getting less for it each time. I was saying this to BIMNet before we started recording, but look out at your infrastructure in America. Look at your roads, look at your public schools, look at your public hospitals. Does anyone think they're better now than they were 10 or 20 years ago? Because I'm wondering where this money is going. And increasingly, we know it's going to go just to servicing our out-of-control debt, which is just a disaster, I mean, basically. And at least with Bitcoin, it's global. Doesn't have that type of liability. It's a liability to no one. And I think that people are starting to figure that out. So I look, I mean, Bitcoiners have been preaching this for years.
For years. I mean, I'm thank God. I think, Mike Novogratz, our CEO, put it best. But it seems like the market is having a Mashinsky moment. Yeah. Right? Just all of a sudden, everybody realizes this at once. Yeah. And they're now trading on it. And it's interesting because, that's just how markets work. Right, all of, the reality of stuff is there, but until something actually happens, or there's a catalyst, you rarely see value get to where it should be.
Right.
And so the thing I generally have an issue with as well is just folks are thinking a couple years out right now, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but if you start thinking a decade out and 2 decades out, right, what does the deficit or the national debt look like a decade out right now?
50 trillion? I don't know. A lot more.
A lot more, right?
It's really, I mean, that chart is parabolic, basically.
Parabolic.
Yeah.
And I'm just what is it going to look like in 30 years? And the only solution right now, if you ask the Fed, okay, what do you think monetary policy is going to look like in 20, 30 years? They're not going to tell you, that their balance sheet's going to have come down or it's going to be at a manageable level, right? They're going to basically be their ideal scenario, their best case scenario is that inflation isn't an issue and they are able to keep yields low and they have a huge balance sheet.
Keep the parlor game going.
But that's not going to work anymore. We've seen that when you do that, that leads to hyperinflation.
Right.
Right. And so there's no real solution. And I think more and more people are waking up to the reality that it's Bitcoin. I think. But it's slow. And you really do need, like, passage of time for, wealth to move from
we need a long-term
millennials.
conviction in it, though. It is a long-term bet, I think.
And so here's one of the things I've always wanted to do is write a piece called Dear Bond Vigilantes. Have you heard of Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Basically, a piece that I might actually write this, but calling out each one of the
no one
major
steal
bond.
that title. That's BIMNet's title.
But basically calling out every huge bond manager on the planet, like the guys, at Vanguard, the BlackRocks of the world, etc. Being like, realistically, like, what are you actually betting on when you buy 20-year bonds? They will. I think the answer is the central bank's going to continue to buy this paper. Right? It's
Core thesis there.
Core thesis there. But it's not. I don't think it's really a function of, I'm going to generate returns above inflation on this. Like, and it's also like, when you think about it in the context of, okay, what are the government's actual obligations for the next 20 years, right? You can predict that pretty easily.
Right.
Social Security, all the Medicare stuff, aging population, how much you're going to have to spend on that. You make assumptions about, whether the defense budget stays the same, et cetera.
Yeah.
But long story short, the picture just gets worse and worse, and it's not even linear. And so, like, you're either you're going to have to inflate your way out of all that debt, but the math just doesn't work without assuming the central bank's just going to, like...
And, of course, if you try to inflate your way out at that level with the math, the math doesn't work. But, you know what will happen, right? You'll have coups. You'll have revolutions.
Social unrest,
Massive social unrest, right?
It's totally possible, which is what I'm worried about in EM sooner rather than later, because they're getting pounded by a stronger dollar, right? And, they still have inflation.
Yeah.
Right? And so...
Well, I think BIMNet has raised the bit signal. He's raised it. We got to get one.
I would love
like
it.
The light with
the light, with the Bitcoin logo, maybe.
Phineas, get on that. Help us look into that.
Phineas, please, we need it.
He's got. This is great. We've got another. We're having Kelly on. She's going to talk to us a little more about Bitcoin markets as well. So, BIMNet, BB from Galaxy Trading, my friend. Thank you for joining Galaxy Brains as always.
Thank you so much.